From Boyle Heights in Los Angeles, California, Libros Schmibros Lending Library presents the Latinidad Beyond Borders podcast. Latinidad encompasses the diverse experiences of people who live in Latin America, as well as people of Latin American descent who live in the United States. This podcast explores culture, society, and politics across the Americas through the lens of Latinidad. Welcome to another episode of Latinidad Beyond Borders. I'm your host, Alberto Sahagún. My guest today is April Tellez. She is professor of history at Mount San Antonio College, where she teaches courses in U.S., Mexican American, and women's history. In 2025, she published Dolores Huerta, A Life in American History, the most comprehensive biography of her life and work. Welcome to the show, April.
Thank you so much for having me, Alberto. I appreciate it.
Thank you for coming. So, in March, the New York Times published a story based on years of investigation on Cesar Chavez, who passed away in 1993, has become this celebrated figure over the years. But they published a story revealing this pattern of abuse, that he sexually abused and harassed underage girls and women over many years. And that included Dolores Huerta, who he worked with in the farm workers' rights movement, labor movement. So after the story is published, Dolores Huerta issues a statement saying that she was sexually assaulted by Cesar Chavez on 2 occasions in the 1960s. And these assaults did result in pregnancies, and that she's maintained contact with the children through that unconsensual encounter. And yeah, she was very sad to hear about this other abuse that she was unaware of. So, what was your reaction when you heard the stories of the New York Times and also Dolores's statement, having researched and studied this for your book?
Yeah, it was very heavy for me to discover this, to find this out. My book had just been published last February, right? So a little over a year before the revelations, and it was just absolutely devastating for me to find this out. Um, I immediately felt, very like intimately affected by the revelations because I feel intimately connected to Dolores and her story. I spent 4 years with her, right? Going through archives and learning about her and listening to, her interviews and transcribing them and all that. So I felt very personally connected to the revelations and very, very sad for Dolores. Um, I also did recognize the immense weight that was on Dolores's shoulders, and what she proclaimed in her interview, uh, trying to hide that so that the movement could continue and bearing that weight. I mean, that's such a heavy weight to bury and to hold, and a truth to bury. And I can only imagine how she felt. I also felt very devastated because I myself have been sexually assaulted. So although that sexual assault, we'll call it what it is, rape, did not result in pregnancy, thankfully. I can only imagine the added layer. But so it was very, very devastating. And my heart really was torn for her and very hurt for her. And also, not just for her, but for the underage women, right? That Cesar Chavez, he abused, molested, manipulated, and it was very disheartening for me. And I had to take not only pause in a moment, but I had to take days right before even writing my reflection and giving it to my class because they had the same question. And I'm actually currently teaching a women's history course too. So brought that up there. And so very, very heavy for me, as it was for a lot of people.
Yeah, so let's put this in some historical context. Dolores Huerta was born in 1930.
Hmm.
So a very different time
Hmm.
for very difficult for a woman, for a Latina,
Hmm.
to try to accomplish something for herself in that kind of patriarchal society. And of course, there's still that some of that still definitely remains. But yeah, so talk about Dolores's early life and how she emerged to become this leader.
Yeah, what I love about Dolores' story is that her mother was amazingly progressive. Her mother became a single mom, and they left Dawson, New Mexico, and came to California. And her mother taught her a very strong female embodiment, presence, and even a spiritual prowess. And so within the home, in the most intimate setting, Dolores didn't have to face gender division of labor. Her brothers were also required to, do the dishes and clean the house. It was not gendered division, divided. So in that sense, she had I would say, an anomaly of an experience, right? Especially being Chicana, especially being from that time period. We're looking at the late 1930s, early 1940s. Also, if we place it into, a broader historical context too, we need to talk about the entrenchment of patriarchy and misogyny, not only in broader U.S. society, but also that is existent. And I'm not going to paint all this or all that. It's not in absolutes, but there is an existent machista reality that definitely penetrates many cultures, including the Chicanx culture, in particular during the 1930s and 1940s. Um, Her upbringing was she was actually, she always stated that she was very lucky to have like a lower middle class upbringing. Her mom and her mom's new husband, when she got remarried, were able to open a hotel, and so she was able, Dolores was able to have some of those experiences that a lot of people weren't able to have. But in these broader experiences that she had, on the other hand, right, she did face, racism, exclusion, sexism. I mean, that's even before, predating her involvement in the CSO, the Community Service Organization, and predating, the NFWA, which became the UFW. So her work there as well. She was also part of, experiencing the Zoot Suit riots. Her brother was actually beaten by a police officer. So you see history penetrating Dolores's early life, but you also see an allocation, I would argue, of some type of like protection from that and freedom from that, at least in the confines of the home. So it's kind of, it's interesting because she's kind of a dual experience there. But of course, outside of the home, she wasn't shielded from that racism or that sexism or the expectations that were placed upon her in her early childhood.
Yeah. So can you talk about how she met Cesar Chavez and their working relationship in building a union for the farm workers? So this is occurring right in the 60s when these sexual assaults occurred. So yeah, talk about their relationship.
Yeah, definitely. So it's interesting too because before she even met Cesar Chavez, she already was, had this burning desire for justice, right? So that's not, a consequence of Caesar, right? That was already in Dolores, and she even, advocated, like in high school. There's something that I would like to, the audience to know, is that she created a teen center that was quickly shut down. But this, because the teen center was shut down because it was interethnic. And the United States was not happy about having interethnic affiliations. They were more about the divide and conquer mechanisms. And so we're looking at, in, the late 1940s, right? So she already had this burning desire for justice. She went to Delta Community College, and she got her teaching certificate, and she became an elementary school teacher. And this is in the Central Valley. And when she became this teacher, she would look around her classroom and notice that the students had mismatched shoes. They had holy shoes. They had holy pants. They didn't have sweaters. They were malnourished. They were falling asleep during her discussions, during her lectures. So she already had this burning desire. So she will actually go to a meeting where with Fred Ross Sr., who is an organizer, who is a union organizer, all about workers' rights. And she will actually work with him before she actually meets Caesar. He will introduce her to Cesar Chavez. And it's so funny because in my research, right, she stated, right, I found that her first impression of Cesar Chavez was that he was actually not all that she thought he would be from the way Fred Ross had talked about him, that he was, she actually described him as being more docile, not really captivating. Um, a little bit like on the more reserved side. And she said, quite frankly, a little boring. She's like, how is this guy going to organize? But she recognized that there was only so much she could do in the CSO. She and Caesar both had a discussion about what needed to happen, and they both approached Fred Ross and they stated, we need to organize farm workers. And Fred Ross was like, that's, that may not happen. Let's do voter registration drives, which Dolores Huerta was huge on, right? And so she was going house to house, you know, literally in the intimacy of the circumstances of predominantly farm workers, right? Teaching them about, voter registration, but also about, community, whatever source resources were being offered at that particular time that changed throughout the time at the CSO. And so she'll go to these houses, and she will do that work. And she realizes it's not enough. And so she will quit her full-time job, her position at the elementary school, to devote her life and her time to the CSO. And with that, she recognized the limitations of the CSO. She said it's not just about voter registration. It's not just about getting people resources. That's great, but we need to teach people, not teach people agency, but captivate on their agency and ascertain the power that they already possess. And we need to do that. And the best way to do that and make structural change is by advocating for and creating, organizing for a farm workers union. And so when Cesar Chavez said, let's organize for a farm workers union, Dolores's immediate response, she said that she laughed, right? She's like, really? Like, do you think we could do this? And, she remembers, him saying that the growers are too rich and they're too racist to ever allow that to happen. But she dedicated her life to it, and they actually will leave the CSO to form the National Farm Workers Association that becomes United Farm Workers, where she's living off, $5 a week from contributions from members. Right? She's going door to door. She's in the fields with these workers, advocating for them, giving information on first of all listening. Before giving information, she's listening to the plight of the people, and that's amazing. And these people they're not just adults, right? She's side by side with children who are, being forced to go along because they have no one to watch them. They have no caregiver. So they're in the fields with her as well. So Dolores is really rooted, right? I think that's an exceptional word for her. And it's also a play on words, right? Because she's rooted in the fundamental roots. She's in the soil with the people, right? And so she is creating change from the bottom of society up, and she is the one who's really more so than Caesar. She's the one who was actually out there organizing the farm workers. And when they're able to, right, she's able to get enough petitions, then they're able to form the United Farm Workers, which again is the NFWA, but inevitably will be the UFW.
Yeah, so how does their relationship evolve over the years, get into the 60s to the 70s? Cesar kind of becomes the face, you
Yeah.
could say, but she's crucial, and many other people are crucial to the movement. And would you say that their relationship became more distant over time? How would you characterize that? Over?
It's such an excellent question because if you had asked that prior to the revelations, I think I would have had one answer. Now, my answer is going to be affected by that, right? My analysis has to include that because she stated that there was sexism, and that she did state, and this is in my book, that in her reflection of Cesar Chavez, that she recognized that he was also sexist. She didn't ever state that he was overtly sexist, but she did state that it was a sexist position that he took because he said, I will become the face of the union, like you just identified, and you'll be just as instrumental, but I'm going to be the face of the union. And she stated in hindsight, right, and this was from an interview roughly about 12 years ago. She stated in hindsight, now I would tell him we will both be the face of the union. So she even stated that there was sexism, that he, demonstrated sexism. However, they were really close through, my scouring of the archives, through all of the interviews. Like they had a very close relationship, but it wasn't always in agreement, right? And there were definite, times of disagreement. Sometimes they would even have shouting matches. And this was not only identified by Dolores in a number of interviews, but also identified by, United Farm Workers in the Oral History Project, those that worked as volunteers, right? A number of volunteers would say like they were best friends until they weren't, right? And they disagreed on something. But in the end, they always seemed to resolve their discrepancies or their issues, right? I do also recall that Cesar Chavez would say things such as, um, oh, go home for the night, go take care of your kids, which I find really interesting now, right, with the revelations, because I'm thinking, was that like that patriarchal indication, like she's doing too much, she's too involved, she should be at home with the kids, or was that really out of concern and compassion? But now that's compounded by, or that's really, that becomes, nuanced by the fact that he raped her. And I really want to use the word that applies, right? And I know that even Dolores in her revelations, I pay homage and respect to her decision, but we need to start calling sexual assault what it is, even if it's an uncomfortable term. And he raped her. Right. And so now I'm thinking, okay, before it was they were close and they had their disagreements, but ultimately they always overcame it. And now I'm thinking, wait a second, did they always overcome it, or was it really that she was, intentionally silenced for the broader, community, for the organization, right? And how much of that was really her choice? How much of it was able to be laughed off or like, minimized? Really, at the end of the day, she's carrying all this weight, right? So what seemed to be an amicable relationship, really now calls into question a lot of that, right? How much misogyny and suppression did she face throughout her whole experience with the UFW, and in particular with Cesar Chavez?
Yeah. And Dolores was also involved in other causes. And of course, she'll outlive Cesar Chavez by many decades. So talk about some of the other work that she's done beyond the Farm Workers Union.
Yeah, she's amazing. She's just amazing. She she didn't originally call herself a feminist, even when she was in, the grape strikes. And let it also be known that she was the one who brought Shenley Industries to their knees, and she is the one who got the first contract and many of the latter contracts signed, right? So I just want to pay homage to that because that's in and of itself amazing. But when she was in New York, she came into contact with women's liberation and other movements, and in particular the women's liberation movement will really impact Dolores, and she will start to call herself a feminist. She will join different organizations that are dedicated to feminism. She will work in cohesion with women of color, also white women. She will be asked to present lectures at a number of different colleges on gender equality. So she, she starts out with, yes, definitely the farm workers movement. And I start to see now, especially in this broader perspective with revelations, like this makes so much sense. Not only was this instrumental to a movement, to a cause that she believed in a broader sense, but this was very intimately connected to her, right? I mean, she was living this reality. And so this like transgression, right? And this movement is part of her healing process, I'm sure, and carrying that weight throughout this healing process. She becomes involved in that. She also becomes involved in immigrant rights. And I know that it took, there was backlash against her and also against the UFW and Cesar Chavez because of the ending of the Bracero program in 1954. And there's a lot of critique still existent with amongst the undocumented community, amongst the immigrant community, arguing that she was anti-undocumented. And I can see that position, but I can also see that her number one goal was the rights of farm workers inside the United States, right? And I'm not arguing that I don't see that other perspective, but that was what her imminent goal was. Um, but she did, like I see that she grows, right? And so she becomes an advocate for the undocumented community as well. And we're starting like looking at that in the late 90s and early 2000s. She participates in the 2005 and 2006 May Day rallies that are very, primarily focus on immigrant rights, right? So she extends into that as well. She also then one of her daughters is lesbian, and so and I'm not arguing that's the only reason why, but I think it's also very true to her and her lived experiences and her familial experiences. She becomes an advocate for the LGBTQ plus communities, and so she starts to enter that realm as well. Most, recently, her work with distributing supplies during COVID and vaccinations during COVID, definitely with, amongst the farm workers who are always left to the periphery of concern, but even amongst, impoverished peoples, marginalized peoples as well. And then most recently, her strong contention with President Trump, and she's very verbose and outspoken against his policies, a number of his policies, if not all of them. So she has entered politics in the political realm from women's liberation, the LGBTQ, the undocumented movements, environmental justice as well, still workers' rights beyond farm workers. Right? So she's profound in a lot of ways.
Yes, so she's gotten more recognition definitely in recent years, but Chavez is the one who first got he got this holiday, state holiday. He got murals and streets named after him after he died in 1993. Uh, so what lessons should we learn about this, about how we, especially Mexican Americans, Chicanas, we're looking for heroes. We want recognition in the United States. We want to be recognized as playing an integral role in this country's history. But it seems like in retrospect, right, there was this kind of rush to anoint Chavez back in the 90s, and this whole kind of industry developed around him. Uh, and now we know the truth about Chavez, which others knew. I mean, people kept this to themselves, it seemed. So, I mean, this is going to play out over the next years of how to reckon with this. But yeah, in for now, what lessons do you think we should learn from this?
Yeah, such an excellent question. So definitely, first of all, let's not entrench things in patriarchy, right? Because that's not accidental, that he was the first one who was recognized, that he was the first one who was confounded with, this conflagration of commemoration and those types of things. So let's intentionally approach who we heroify from an unpatriarchal, even a matriarchal, come from it from a matriarchal position, right? I think that we also need to take pause before we commemorate and try to understand, not that I'm not arguing that there shouldn't be heroes and movements, but maybe the movement itself is the hero, is my argument. Maybe we don't need, a particular name, but we need, this understanding and commemoration of all of the facets of the communities, various ethnicities, various genders that were involved in these mass movements as well. I know it's easy to, get and I understand the role of like heroifying, but simultaneously, I also think it's really integral that we don't you know, uh, use a hero in place of movements, and that we really pay homage to the people, right? Because these are movements of the people, definitely.
Yes, yes. I think those are great points. Well, thank you for coming. It was great to have you.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yes, please to the audience, pick up the book, Dolores Huerta, A Life in American History.
I would love that. Thank you so much for having me.